Hello, this is Flip Nicklin. Welcome to Humpback Chronicles.
When I came to Maui in 1979, I had no intention of being a whale photographer, much less a whale researcher. I just came to shoot production stills for an IMAX film called Nomads of the Deep.
And I met then graduate student Jim Darling and a bunch of young researchers studying humpback whales in Lahaina, Maui. So I'm very happy today to have Dr. Jim Darling as a guest on Chronicles to tell his story of the beginning days of humpback whale research in Maui. Hi, Jim. I guess my first question has to be, how did a kid living on the west coast of Vancouver Island looking at gray whales end up in Maui studying humpback whales and whale song?
Hi, Flip. Good question. It was sort of a combination of things. I had been to Maui earlier to visit a friend and to mostly go surfing, and he had a little rubber boat, so we were able to go out in the water and we could see humpback whales. I mean, we at times slipped into the water and swam with them, and that was way back mid 70s. So I had some experience with Maui, and then it all came down to Roger Payne, who was a committee member on my master's thesis, which was on gray whales. And well, I was in his lab in Boston in November, I think, one year, and he was cold, and he just sort of asked if I knew anybody who'd be willing to go to Maui and record humpback songs, and I volunteered. That was how it started. Within a few weeks, I'd actually met Roger in San Francisco, and he'd handed me a reel-to-reel tape recorder and some hydrophones and a few other bits and pieces of equipment, none of which I'd really used before. And I got on the plane and ended up in Lahaina. I'd been told to contact this guy named Jim Lucky, and he would look after me. And I did that. And he wandered up to a house that I did not know of, but he took a large bottle of wine and he handed them the wine and told me that's where I was staying. And after that, just tried to figure out how to find singers and how to record them. And one thing led to another.
So what kind of gear, what was the boat you were using like at the beginning?
Yeah, I think it was about a 16-foot inflatable. And like I say, it sort of arrived. I can't remember how it arrived, but it arrived in this box on the main dock there, on the where the gas dock is and the harbor office is, and it was just sort of dropped there. And that's where I ended up putting it together and trying to get it in the water. And fortunately, there were a few friends and associates of Jim Lucky who helped me. We put a big blue box in the front of the boat, which would protect the, like I say, the reel-to-reel tape recorder. And, just went out each day to try to figure out how to do it all. At that time, I mean, everything was new, right? I mean, it was, even though people had known whales had been there for, decades, really, the whole idea of studying whales at sea and identifying them individually and recording their songs and all that was still pretty new. So, had a lot of help. There was a lot of enthusiasm, and we were just learning something new every day.
And I'd heard about you from my dad, and he said these guys in small boats were out there doing stuff that I'd find interesting. But there were 4 or 5 boats in a hill station. I mean, somewhere you went from you lost and Jim Lucky trying to put you someplace to live to a number of boats working out there in a few years. Maybe a little on that progression from just making recordings to a number of different operations going along.
Well, my job, working for Roger and Katie Payne was to make to collect recordings throughout the season. And however, I had for a number of years, worked on gray whales on Vancouver Island, and we identified them all by photograph of natural markings. And I certainly was aware that other folks were doing the same thing with humpback whales, especially on the East Coast. And so certainly any whale that we saw which showed its tail, we took its picture and eventually built up a catalog of individuals, even though that wasn't initially the main reason to be there. By 78, there were, several people on the project. I think we were still essentially in the zodiac that year, but it blew up at one point. By 79, yeah, we had established a fairly large research effort, which was 5 boats, each for a different purpose. One to do just IDs, one to do just songs. I think at least 3 different sort of projects going on at the same time. It all changed in later 1979 when we were, just by circumstance, we were able to find a singer underwater. And prior to that, certainly I had never thought that would happen. What happened is it went from the very first times out there where you simply went out and threw the hydrophone over and recorded what you heard. I mean, there was no real understanding that you could actually get close to and make a better recording by getting near a singer. And that evolved into realizing that if we moved around a little bit, eventually, run into a singer which was louder, which made for a better recording, which made the people who were doing the analysis much happier. So it went from just recording anything to not being happy until we were able to get a good recording. And that just sort of led to this process of searching for the whale which was actually doing the singing, and getting as close as we could to make the best possible recording. But still, even at that time, the whales would come up on the surface and you'd have a pretty good idea it was a singer. But you never really expected to be able to see it underwater. And as we would just work at getting closer and closer and closer, eventually, the whale which dove and we knew it was a singer, we drifted over its slick and looked down and saw something. And sure enough, it was a whale. And at that point, we realized that, oh my, these singers are diving as if they're going to go down to the bottom, but they get, 10, 30, 40 feet below the surface and just stop. And with the visibility there, being double that, you could, especially if it was a lighter colored singer or it had white on the flippers, you could see it from the boat. You guys were in the neighborhood and were able to come over and film it. And that just changed everything. All of a sudden, we weren't just recording songs and trying to understand what they were doing. When they were singing, we could actually locate and watch and film and study the individual that was doing the singing and realize that we could actually learn something here. And that led to me changing my PhD from studying gray whales to humpback whales, and just a whole bunch of other things happened.
I think I'll always remember that St. Patrick's Day in 1979 at the Pioneer Inn when the idea that I could come back and work with researchers came up, and it certainly changed what I was going to do in my future.
Yeah, say the 1979 just sort of opened the door, and all of a sudden, the possibilities where we could actually work with living whales and watch what they were doing close up and underwater was, one of the very first questions about humpbacks, which had been around ever since the first recordings, was it, both sexes which sung, males and females, or was it just males? And realization that we could go out and actually find these animals on a daily basis. And then, with your abilities to get down there and take photographs of them, the objective in 1980 was simply to find as many singers as we could find and uh, take as many photographs as we could of their underside and determine whether they were males or females. Working that closely with the animals, though, led to all kinds of other uh, encounters and interactions with whales, doing, behavior, social behavior patterns, and so on. And all of a sudden, there were a million questions to answer, and we knew that we could answer them.
The pictures that were coming from it were so different. I've been interviewing my dad, and he's going to be on one of these things. And he talks about when he came in the early days, and all the photography was just hoping a whale swam by and you took its picture. And then you talk about what science was going on. I think the idea that you could actually photograph the behaviors that you were talking about was fairly foreign.
It was really new at the time. I mean, now, no one even thinks twice about it. But I remember I had some of your photographs and I showed them at this meeting, and there were people there who simply could not believe it, that you could both locate and get close to and photograph whales at sea, like we did. They really couldn't grasp. I mean, I had people come up afterward and say, how did you do that? And these were, old time sort of biologists who, we were only a few years, ahead of them, because a few years back, we would have probably asked the same question. We were fortunate enough to be in Maui with such good conditions, and it probably allowed us a bit of a head start on some of this stuff. No one realized that these whales were actually competing with each other or fighting with each other. We didn't really know what they were doing. I remember one day, it was Greg Silver. We were out in the boat, and we were with a group, and he was watching what was going underwater by hanging over the boat with a mask on. He came up and he was just astounded that he'd just seen one whale hit another one. And there was this sort of aggressive, competitive type behavior going on. It was a complete revelation at the time. I mean, the whole sort of nature of what was going on out there, and in fact, the nature of whales, changed with just one really good observation, which sort of opened the doors to sort of us realizing what we've been watching for a long time.
I really had no idea what a big year 1979 was for humpback whale stuff, especially in Hawaii. But talking to you and talking to my dad really let me know what a big deal it was, and it kept going on after the Hawaii season.
I don't know, within a month of that day with Frank, I was sent up to Alaska to compare ID pictures with a guy named Chuck Jerez. And this is, again, Roger Payne sort of telling me that, get up there and compare your ID pictures. And it seemed like an awful long shot to me, is that we would ever find matches between Alaska and Hawaii, especially since at that point it wasn't thought that Alaskan whales actually went to Hawaii. However, I did what I was told, and we went up to Alaska, and to make a long story short, to our enormous surprise, we found matches. In other words, the same whales, which were identified both in Alaska and Hawaii. And that was, another revelation, which just opened up all kinds of questions about humpbacks in the North Pacific. The whole photo ID thing took off. I mean, after the first few years of taking pictures, sort of as an aside to recording songs, I don't know, we had a few hundred whales. And I had actually tried to give it away, the cataloging. Nobody really seemed to want it. So I carried on, and it became the basis of my PhD. One of the questions which arose was we kept on taking pictures and counting the individuals. And we found that the number of whales we actually photographed was larger than some of the estimates for the number of whales in Hawaii overall. And of course, there was a bit of a contradiction there, because we certainly weren't identifying all the animals. We came up with a population estimate of somewhere around 1,000 whales, which was made a lot more sense at that time than the couple hundred which people were talking about.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I guess the most recent estimates, which were a while back now, but they're talking close to 10,000 whales, which moved through Hawaii in the winter. We did know at the time that there were certainly more whales there than what had been previously estimated. At the time, we didn't understand what we were counting. We still probably don't understand it very well, but we didn't really understand, what the estimate actually was of. Those first years there, I mean, it was more all of a sudden we had questions to ask that could actually be answered. We had enough questions to keep us going for the next, forever.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for so many great stories from the early days of research in Maui, and God, filled in so many holes for me. I really appreciate it. And thank you all. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.